and you will be able to find this presentation on the Political Ecology Research Centre website, which is perc.ac.nz. So to begin by providing some background information around today's session, we'll hear from Tressia Farrelly. She's an environmental anthropologist, the co-founder of the New Zealand Product Stewardship Council and the Aotearoa Plastic Pollution Alliance. She's the co-director of PERC, and she's a member of the United Nations Environment Programme, expert group on marine litter and microplastics since 2017.
Thanks, Lisa. Are you able to hear me okay? It sounds all right, great. Okay, thanks very much for the introduction, Lisa. Kia ora koutou. Thank you to everybody for joining us for this webinar today. So as Lisa's just mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit of background and a bit of context for why we're holding this webinar today. So following China's import bans on plastics, most of our plastics now go to Indonesia and Malaysia. So we're very lucky to have, very fortunate to have a couple of presenters from both of those receiving countries with us this afternoon. In 2019, 40% of our ethylene went to Indonesia. So we're looking at around 15,000 tonnes, and just under 40% of our styrene went to Malaysia. So around 16,000 tonnes there. We also sent 10,000 tonnes of styrene to Indonesia and 80,000 tonnes of ethylene to Malaysia. We send other plastic resins to a range of other countries, but these are the two countries that are by far our biggest receiving countries overall in Southeast Asia. Our presenters will give you a clear picture of waste dumping in developing countries. We also refer to this as waste colonialism, and why the Basel Convention has been amended to include new regulations on plastics trading. Our presenters will also clearly illustrate the impacts of waste dumping in their own countries and their receiving countries of our plastics in New Zealand. New Zealand's not exempt from waste dumping. Just early last year, Indonesia sent 5 container loads of contaminated plastics back to New Zealand at the cost of Indonesia. These could have been contaminated. So when we talk about contamination, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about contamination with, for example, soil, liquids including water, organic material, chemicals, plastics, other plastics outside of the resin types that are supposed to be in individual bales, but it could also include other materials as well. And some of our, as you'll hear from one of our presenters, the trade in scrap paper could also be not only contaminated by plastics, but it could also be contaminating our plastic bales that we're sending offshore. So it's impossible for receiving countries to recycle these contaminated bales of material, and when this happens, they're often dumped or burned in country, in the Southeast Asian countries where they're received. Only 2 of the 5 containers that were sent back from Indonesia to New Zealand have been located, and we're suspecting at the moment, until we find these containers, hopefully we do, that they've been either illegally traded onto another developing country or dumped in the open ocean. We just don't know where they've gone, but as you'll hear from our presenters, there's a lot of illegal trade going on around plastic waste and other wastes. So in May this year, the New Zealand government called for submissions on a national response to the Basel Convention Plastics Amendment. We're very lucky to have Serene here and Yuyun, who are going to really clearly explain how this kind of came about and what this looks like. This involves amending the imports and exports order to include mixed plastic waste for in New Zealand's permitting system. The government's clear preferred option when they sent out submissions on this was for permits for mixed plastic waste, but they preferred not to set contamination limits for either mixed or separate plastics that we export. The organisations hosting this webinar, and thank you Lisa for naming all of those, have urged the government to require permits and ambitious contamination limits, set limits, for all bales of exported plastic waste. As you'll see from Yuyun's presentation, Southeast Asian countries are beginning to ban and heavily regulate or restrict the import of plastic waste. So this is going to leave New Zealand vulnerable if our waste work program does not plan for investments in the following areas: improved collection and sorting systems and onshore recycling of the most recyclable plastics, the phasing out of all hard to recycle plastics such as numbers 3, 4, 6, and 7. Multi-layer plastics are a real problem, so thinking of materials such as Tetra Pak. Sanitary products, toxic plastics that are virtually impossible to recycle, such as fluorinated polymers and cured resins, and Serene will talk about those two as potential materials that will also be regulated under the Basel Convention that's under negotiation at the moment. So that's all I have to say for now. I really want to throw it out to our presenters who are really giving us some insights into what it's like for them in receiving countries and the impacts and externalities that plastic trading is having on Southeast Asian countries. So for now, I just want to thank all our presenters. Sorry that Serene and Yuan can't be with us, but we have our presentations recorded for all of us to either view now or later. Daru and Heng, thank you so much for joining us as well. I'm hoping Daru will join us soon, but Heng is with us now. Thank you for taking the time to put your recorded presentations together, and Heng for being with us. Hopefully, as I say, Daru will be with us soon too. But Serene and Yuan have been very generous to also make themselves available via email. If you have any residual questions following this webinar too, and I'm sure Heng will also make himself available and Daru following this webinar in some form, whether it's through us or directly to the email. And as Lisa said, this webinar will be recorded and posted on the PERC website. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure you'll really, really enjoy these presentations. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. So now I'll share Serene's presentation with you all. I note that I think some people maybe found Tresea's sound a little bit hard. So if you are struggling to hear, do let us know.
In more than 90 countries. Hello, my name is Serene Rashid, and I work with Gaia, a global alliance of over 800 groups that work in more than 90 countries towards a just world that is waste-free and toxic-free. And today, I'm going to share with you a brief overview of the Basel Convention Plastic Waste Amendments. This picture was taken by US photographer Adam Dean in Kuala Langat, Malaysia, on 24 January 2019. A Gaia investigation revealed that a large portion of waste that ends up in the open environment, burnt or otherwise mismanaged in Asian countries, is in fact exported by global North countries, such as the United States, the European Union, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. We know that Malaysia, like many other countries, struggles to properly manage its own wastes. So how did this absurd situation come about? In 2017, China received 51% of the world's global plastic waste flows. Some of it recyclable, most of it not. Some of it sorted, most of it mixed. And some of it cleanish, but most of it dirty. Until China put its foot down and decided that in 2017, China received 51% of the world's global plastic waste flows. Some of it recyclable, most of it not. Some of it sorted, most of it mixed. And some of it cleanish, but most of it dirty. Until China put its foot down and decided that the environmental and human health harms caused by these imports were simply not worth it. China started asking exporters to send cleaner and cleaner plastic bales with less and less contamination, until it finally shut its doors to plastic waste in several stages between 2017 and the end of 2018. Since then, the global plastic waste trade has been in chaos. Plastic production continued to grow exponentially, and so did plastic wastes. Waste operators in global North countries continued to look for destinations to dump their waste overseas instead of finding ways to manage it within national borders. New destinations included Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Turkey, and other countries in Asia. Waste operators in the global North also openly discussed their intention to look for new dumping grounds in Africa and in Latin America. by the end of 2018, pressure had reached fever pitch. So in May 2019, the Basel Convention, a treaty that regulates the international flows of wastes that harm the environment and human health, was amended to end the dumping of plastic wastes in the global south. Those changes in international rules happened with strong support from environmental NGOs and representatives from affected communities. A few months earlier, Norway had proposed to amend the convention to require plastic waste exporters to obtain prior informed consent from importing countries for unrecyclable or hard to recycle plastic wastes. It's worth noting that China had been even more ambitious, wanting prior consent for all plastic flows and recognizing that even recyclable plastic waste can cause environmental and human health harm. In any case, the exceptional attention to the issue and pressure for action meant that Norway's amendment was passed with vocal but impotent opposition from the United States, which is not a member of the Basel Convention and therefore was not able to veto the text. The Basel Convention itself was essentially created to provide protection against a very toxic and perverse logic in international waste flows. It's exemplified in this quote: "The measurements of the costs of health-impairing pollution depend on the foregone earnings from increased morbidity and mortality. From this point of view, a given amount of health-impairing pollution should be done in the country with the lowest cost, which will be the country with the lowest wages. I think the economic logic behind dumping a load of toxic waste in the lowest wage country is impeccable, and we should face up to that." In other words, the lives of people who earn low wages, for example, a villager in Malaysia, are worth less than those who earn high wages, say a white-collar worker in New Zealand. These immoral words are not the words of a madman who was shunned by his community. They belong to US economist Larry Summers, who penned them in 1991 in an internal memo for the World Bank where he worked. Summers remained in the circles of power in the United States, holding powerful positions under the Clinton and Obama administrations, and currently advising presidential candidate Joseph Biden. He was also a president of Harvard University, where he still teaches business and government. And the views in the US government have hardly changed. As we saw earlier, they tried unsuccessfully to block any regulation of plastic waste flows under the Basel Convention, just like they're currently trying to fight for loopholes through the OECD. This so-called economic logic for global waste dumping, what some of us might recognize as waste colonialism, is compounded by the race to the bottom to avoid paying fair costs and fair wages. This cost and wage avoidance is captured in this diagram inspired by veteran activist Jim Puckett from the Basel Action Network. The higher the cost of proper waste management, the greater the tendency to dump wastes in the global south. The current exponential production of plastics for single-use applications, which the petrochemical industry has chosen as a strategy in the face of its growing irrelevance in the energy sector, creates wastes that have low value but are expensive to manage properly, a recipe for abuse. Back to the Basel Plastic Amendments. What are they in detail and what's at stake when transposing them into national law? The Basel Amendments divide plastic wastes into three categories. The first one is those plastic wastes that are still unregulated. They're found under Annex 9 and Listing B3011. These plastics have to meet several requirements. First, they have to be destined for recycling. Second, they have to be almost free from contamination. And third, they have to meet one of two requirements. Either they're made from a single kind of non-halogenated polymer, for instance, polyvinyl chloride or PVC would not work, would not meet that requirement. Secondly, if they don't meet this first requirement, they have to be a mix of three specific polymers, and these are polyethylene terephthalate, polyethylene, and polypropylene. So for example, that could be a water bottle with its lid, empty of the water, obviously, because the water would be a contaminant. It could be an empty milk jug with its lid, that kind of mix. So plastics that can be separated and that are separately destined for recycling, each in their own right. One thing to note for this Annex 9, for the moment, Annex 9 still contains some obsolete exemptions from the 1990s that also exempt thermoset plastics, which are not recyclable, as well as fluorinated plastics, which are hard or toxic to recycle, from any regulation for international waste flows. Those exemptions that are obsolete will be reviewed at the next Conference of Parties in 2021. So the second category of plastics under the Basel Convention is plastics that are restricted through prior informed consent or bans for some movements, for some international movements, for countries that have ratified the Basel Ban Amendment. These are the plastics that are hazardous, and they're found under Annex 8 and listing A3210. Hazardous plastic wastes are defined in the same way as other hazardous wastes, that they have to satisfy two requirements. First, they contain hazardous constituents, and second, they exhibit hazardous characteristics. And all of these constituents and characteristics of hazardousness are listed in the Basel Convention, so it's very clear. And then there's the third category. These are plastic wastes requiring special consideration. They are also subjected to prior informed consent before they can move across borders. And they're essentially all the plastics that are neither in Annex 9, so that are neither safe to move, nor completely hazardous. They might be considered hazardous in some countries, not in others. So that's why we have this Annex 2, and the listing is Y48. An example of plastic wastes that might fit in there would be plastics that are not destined for recycling, plastics that are very dirty or contaminated, plastics that are mixed beyond the mixes that we defined in Annex 9. So for example, PVC mixed with polypropylene. And that is actually a very significant chunk of the plastic wastes that have been traded globally up to now. One thing to consider with the Basel Amendments is that they're very generous with which plastics they consider to be recyclable. The amendments leave the possibility for all non-halogenated plastics to be recycled. However, we know that in practice, only 3 types of plastics are really recycled at scale. These are polyethylene terephthalate, PET bottles, your water bottles, polyethylene, especially high density, so your milk jugs, and polypropylene. Even in these cases, those polymers are recycled for a couple of loops, few loops, before they lose their quality and they're good for disposal. So what's the challenge for national law? It must translate this almost free from contamination language that we saw in Annex 9 into something practical and enforceable. And why does this matter? It matters because contamination, whether it's in the form of additives, of coatings, of laminates, of dirt, of glues, is a real obstacle to recycling. If we fail to define a strong contamination limit, we're setting ourselves up to violate these rules, because the wastes that we export will not be recycled in practice. And we will not have an incentive to clean up our production systems, to get our companies to redesign, and to change our waste collection models so that we reduce contamination. Most plastics produced today are unrecyclable by design. And most recyclable plastics are not recycled in practice because once they're contaminated, it is no longer economically viable to separate them, sort them, and clean them so that they have a real chance to be recycled, especially when virgin plastics are so cheap. Basically, either you have separate collection or deposit return systems, or your theoretically recyclable plastics are not going to get recycled. That was the fundamental point of these amendments. It was to get exporting countries to clean up their act, to take responsibility for their wastes. If we don't commit to strong contamination limits, we miss the chance to redesign products, to create real incentives to review our waste systems, we missed the chance for real recycling. We missed the chance to build a local, just, and toxic-free circular economy. You can't have a real circular economy when you have a gaping loophole that's constantly leaking materials. Yes, plastic recycling has an important role to play in the circular economy. All plastic products should be designed to be recyclable once they can no longer be reused or repaired. But recyclability cannot be used to justify continuing mass production of single-use plastics. The priority must be reduction. And what's the alternative? Well, that would be a tsunami of single-use plastics and an industry of burn technologies ready to capture lots of public money to build shiny machines that will burn those plastics, essentially burn fossil fuels and worsen the climate emergency. Thank you for listening.
So our next presenter, Yuyun Ismawati's presentation is called What Can We Learn from China? And it complements this introduction given by Serene nicely. Do note though that we've changed around the order of the presentations. So Yuyun is an environmental health advocate. She's actively involved in chemical and waste convention negotiations. So she speaks representing Nexus 3 Foundation, formerly known as Bali Focus, and she's a steering committee member of the Zero Waste Alliance for Indonesia. So I'll share this with you now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuyun Ismawati. I'm from Nexus 3 Foundation, Indonesia. I'm sorry that I cannot join the webinar live because I live in the UK and the time differences make me difficult to join directly. I would like to introduce myself, that my organization called Nexus 3 Foundation, formerly known as Bali Focus Foundation, is affiliated to the Alliance for Zero Waste Indonesia, and globally we also affiliated to many international networks such as IPEN, International Pollutant Elimination Network, and then Gaia, Vessel Action Network, Break Free from Plastic, Women Engage for Common Future, and World Alliance for Mercury-Free Dentistry. I would like to start my presentations with the root of the problem that we face now. China used to imported more than 60% of the global waste into China for recycling. But all the recycling activities taking place in China is conducted in a very rudimentary way, and that created lots of critics from international communities, how polluted industry in China, and so on and so on. So this film, Plastic China, may be one of the best way to understand the magnitude of the problem in China regarding plastic recycling. You can find it online. So due to lots of critics about the pollution in China, the government of China decided to take action, started it in 2013 by introducing what they call it as the Operation Green Fence. This was a 10-month long period of special actions against dirty foreign waste. They included more than 20 materials or scrap that was imported by China, including metals, plastics, textiles, rubber, and recovered paper. And during this period of time, also China government introduced the contaminant level in all list of materials that imported. And this level of contaminant, 1.5%, heavily responses by the global traders as an impossible regulation. But China government continue with that standard and check every container arrive in their ports. That caused major delay in shipment in many ports of the world. The operation continued with National Sword in 2017. It's a year-long operation. Increase the intensity of curbing criminal activities, which will target mostly foreign waste, imported waste, and applied consistently the 1.5% contaminant. This also heavily responded by many countries. But China insisted to continue their policy by introducing the Blue Sky Action Program in 2018, because the aim of curbing all this pollution and polluted industry is to have a clear blue sky of China, meaning also other interventions in other sectors like coal-fired power plants. And the government of China tried to clean the air and introduce measures. In this Blue Sky program, they added also 24 categories of waste into the list that in import bans. That will further also strengthened by the contaminant level below 0.5%. As a result, we can understand and can see immediately the shift of plastic waste trade that used to be landed in China. You can see the blue ribbon on the left gradually shifted to distributed equally, almost equally to other countries, the neighboring countries, which also not prepared actually to have this kind of tsunami of waste from as a overspill of China consequences, new policy. This also taking place in Australia. Maybe you also know about this story that this warehouse filled with waste, mixed waste that's supposed to be recyclables, only within 8 weeks. And after the company took loan 10 million Australian dollars for recycling, this warehouse left to the owner of the warehouse. So the big cleanup became the responsibility of the government of Australia. This kind of things are also happening in other places, like in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Indonesia. Our colleague from Malaysia, Heng, will also share the story in Malaysia. And many countries started to raise this issue and discuss how globally as a community we can discuss and set the new rules as the impact of China's new rule. Luckily, Japan and Norway proposed the new measures through the Basel Conventions, that the convention that was meant to rule and control, regulate and control the transboundary movement of hazardous waste, are now the only avenue for all countries to discuss this issue. In many countries, plastic waste or paper waste also contaminated by hazardous waste or hazardous substances due to the nature of waste collection and preparing for shipment. So this opened up an opportunity for Basel Convention to accommodate the new regulation, which in May 2019 widely accepted by all parties, which is 187 parties. All countries, parties to Basel, accept and adopted the decision of the new norm that translated into amendments. Colleagues from we as a network from Break Free from Plastic also did our part in pushing and getting more supports from the public to support Norway amendment proposal. Serene, our colleague, also will be able to explain how we do this together as a network. And the translations of the amendment is done into amendment of several annexes. In these milestones, you can see that so many countries actually responded to China's new regulation. So how can one country's regulation affect other countries? This is what's happening, and what we see now. And in January the 1st in 2021, when the Basel Amendment on plastic waste entered into force, all countries have to be ready with the new regulations. So I understand that the New Zealand government is preparing for that step and action. I'm just going to briefly explain about this, and maybe later on our colleagues, my colleague Syrian can explain or will explain it further. But before the amendments, no control on plastic waste trade is taking place under the Basel Convention. The amendment that done through this amendment is addressing through 3 annexes. So Annex 8 is the annex to address hazardous waste, and with inserting a new entry, A3210, plastic waste that contaminated or potentially contaminated with hazardous waste can be classified under Annex 8, and countries have to send notification to another country, the destination country, that the shipment potentially contaminated with hazardous waste or hazardous substances. And the recipient country have the opportunity to reject it if they don't want to have the shipment. And the second amendment is made in the Annex 9 with the new entry of B3011. That in this amendment, the plastic waste can be, or presumably not hazardous, and can be sent for recycling, but not immediately. That cannot be immediately for recycling, but it's not hazardous, so there is no need to have informed consent. The third amendment applicable to Annex 2, and this is also by inserting a new entry, Y48, that explain the type of plastics that are going to be sent, and in a clean format. It means a clean definition of clean is leaving to countries to decide. So in brief, this is the graph how the situation before and after the Basel Amendment, and into force, that the classification of entries, new entries accommodated in Annex 9, Annex 2, and Annex 8, depending on the recyclability and the hazardousness. For example, this is a simple example using PET bottle, how they will be applied, how they can be applied. The PET bottle in form of pure pellets or flakes categorized under Annex 9 that do not need any informed consent or informed notification to the destination country. Annex 2 is the good option, or the good category for PET recycling. That can be potentially PET bottles contaminated with hazardous substances, like addressed in Annex 8. And for these two type of category, countries have to send a notification. The gray areas leave to the discussions within the intersessional work or meeting, and depending on countries, how they interpret this within their own countries and regulation. This is an example of mixed plastics with contaminants more than 5%, and then the contaminants 0.5% in form of PET flakes after the flakes being washed and crushed. We most likely all countries will be happy to have the PET flake in a clean format, like the bottom right, instead of the mixed one. But these will also give another challenge in the exporting countries, that the separation from source, the preparation at the warehouse, the preparation at the material recovery facilities before they were sold to traders will need an extra effort from everyone. I would like to share the example of plastics scrap and paper scrap trade between Indonesia and New Zealand that will be explained further by my colleague Daru. She has a good pictures and situations on the ground, including how the plastics contaminated the food chain of the communities. In this slide, I just want to share that I took this from UN Comtrade database, which allow us to access all the data for free. The data that I was looking for was the plastic scrap from reported by Indonesia from 2015 to 2019, but I couldn't find 2019 data because Indonesia has not released the details of the trade flow. On the other side, New Zealand already issued the report of plastic scrap exported to Indonesia. And if we compare the amount, the discrepancy, just take year 2018, Indonesia reported that Indonesia imported only 7,800 tons of plastic scrap from New Zealand, while New Zealand reported actually exported about 15,000 tons to Indonesia. So this kind of discrepancies happened in the field and affected by various factors. One is the currency exchange, the second is mislabeling, and the third is the potential of corruption or misdeclaration done by traders and agencies who help them file all the shipments. This kind of discrepancy also can be seen in the field that Daru will be able to explain in detail. On paper scrap, especially in East Java, where Daru have most of the cases, we can see also paper scrap arrived in Indonesia mixed with everything else. And in this trade and the transaction between Indonesia and New Zealand also we can see discrepancies, but the discrepancies in paper scrap trade is less than the plastic one. I think it's there are lots of things that need to be done to address this issue, and improvement of reporting is also one of the challenge and tasks that have to be overcome by countries. So lastly, some of my recommendations for countries who are preparing to set the new rules for the upcoming enter into force of Basel Amendment is that we call for countries not to export commodities with 90 at the end. For mixed plastics, it is addressed under 391590. It means the plastic come with everything else, including nappy, cotton buds, and everything else. On paper, also the same. So 470790 is actually a mix of paper with everything else. That we don't want it, you don't want it, so you send it to other countries. But nobody wants it, and then eventually the communities also do not want it, so they burn it because it cannot be recycled properly. And to do that, there is also a need to have a review of the waste collection, separation, and recycling scheme in every country. This has to be done to reduce waste export. We would like to see more and more countries doing recycling in proximity and do it easily. If developing countries can do it, developed countries also must be able to do it because it's simple technology. And moreover, when we do the trade between countries, it will be good if we can track the supply chain through certification or proof of evidence that the company in the destination countries have capacity and capability to handle such waste. And on another note about the contaminant limit, I think it will be good to start with 2%, and I supported the position offered offered by the government of New Zealand. I started from the 1st of January 2021, but I would like to propose the contaminant level 0.5% by the 1st of January 2023. Because setting up the contaminant limit to 0% will be very, very, very challenging for everyone. Unless you can manage it and you can make it happen, that will be great. But I will not recommend this for developing countries because it will be very difficult. Even to achieve 2% contaminant, it will be challenging. And to achieve that also, every government have to review the relevant regulations regarding packaging and packaging especially. In many parts of the world now, companies also and corporates already pledge to have environmentally friendly packaging, and we should support also bulk store refill centers, so people will have less packaging and stuff or goods also can be traded in not in single-use plastics or single-use packaging. And lastly, the labeling and information from consumers will be also useful for recyclers, because recyclers also will be easily identify what kind of compound or materials in the packaging that will help them a lot to recycle the goods or the materials. Thank you for listening, and if you have question, you can send me an email. This is my email address, and I'm looking forward to have a question and answer, but through my email. Thank you so much.
So thank you very, very much for that. So as Yuyan said, she can't be here in person nor can Sabine, but they are very happy to answer emails, directed them to the emails, or you can direct them to us via our website. So our next speaker, Daru Santorini, she's here with us today. She's an environmental biologist. She's the program manager of Ekoton in East Java, Indonesia. Her presentation will be exploring plastic waste, contamination and paper waste bales imported from New Zealand. Sorry, I'll just find this.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Daru Setiorini from Ekoton. I will share about plastic waste contamination in imported scrap paper bales to East Java, Indonesia. In 2018, Indonesia ranked as second destination of plastic waste export from US, UK, and Australia. And foreign plastic waste enters Indonesia not only through plastic waste import, but also through waste paper scrap imports that bring up to 5% impurities, mainly non-recyclable, flexible, multi-layers plastic. And huge volume of scrap paper import contribute to high amount of foreign plastic waste dumping in Indonesia. Demands on scrap paper import for paper mills is 3 million tons per year that potentially will bring 150,000 tons of foreign plastic waste per year. If we look at the data from Indonesian National Board of Statistics, we find out that New Zealand export both plastic scraps and paper scraps. Total export of plastic scrap from New Zealand to Indonesia in 2019 was 2,595 tons, and 92% of the plastic scraps exported was PET scraps. While the total export of paper scrap from New Zealand to Indonesia was 142,978 tons, or 23.3% was unsorted or mixed paper scrap. That New Zealand potentially sent more than 1,667 tons of non-recyclable plastic scrap through paper scrap imports to Indonesia. The unsorted paper scrap export increased almost triple in 2019 compared to 2018. This is the bill of lading on waste paper scrap shipment that connected with New Zealand company Aotearoa International. It's written here that the exporter was the company in Fiji, and Aotearoa served as the importer. But the confusing fact here is the place of delivery is to Surabaya. So it's confusing me how come the company in New Zealand act as importers and send the paper scraps to Surabaya. These are examples of foreign plastic packaging waste that the product was packaged in New Zealand. It found at the dump site of Bangun Village, the biggest dumping ground for impurities from 12 paper mills in East Java. These packaging wastes are non-recyclable, dirty, flexible, multi-layer plastic that usually dump and burn on the riverbank and front yard of people's houses in Bangun Village. It also sells to be burned as cheap fuel by tofu home industry, and the plastic burning caused dioxin contamination in a free-range chicken egg at Tropodo in Sidoarjo. The impact of imported plastic waste can be seen in Bangun Village, where the impurities from paper mills are dumped on the riverbank and at the front yard of people's houses. Most of the people here work as waste collector. They collect valuable plastic, and sometimes they found money in the piles of the trash. Paper and plastic recycling release microplastic into our environment. Microplastic found in wastewater that sampled from 11 paper mills in East Java. Those paper mills use imported waste paper scrap as their raw materials. Paper mills discharge wastewater into Brantas River, the source of drinking water supplies for 5 million people in 3 main cities of East Java. Recycling, dumping, and burning of foreign plastic and paper waste are polluting our soil, air, and water. Ikuton start advocacy works to control paper and plastic waste imports since 2018. We conduct lobbying and awareness campaign and also investigation on the paper and plastic scrap imports. This is our online petition. You can find in the internet. And finally, in 2019, the government of East Java and also national government conduct inspection to the paper mills and the dump site in Bangun village. Our noisy voice finally heard by Indonesian government that scrap paper no longer treated as green line goods, and custom at Tanjung Perak Port Surabaya enforced strict inspection on paper and plastic waste containers. Government reject 8 dirty containers from Australia because it should be recovered paper and cardboard, but it's contaminated by household garbage. In 2019, Indonesia already re-exported 250 containers to the exporting countries. In April 2019, government announced that they will revise the regulation on paper and plastic waste imports. Indonesian government consulted with Institute of Scrap Recycling Industry, and they informed the following requirement will be enforced. First is only direct shipment will be allowed. Second, the exporter must be listed on documentation, and government may considering prohibiting shipment from brokers and traders. In 2020, paper mills in East Java stopped import mixed scrap paper from US and Europe and shift to Singapore, Japan, and Korea that have lower impurity content. Indonesia finalized the regulation on May 27. You can read more detailed information in the article. The contamination limit in plastic and paper waste import is set to 2%. Online survey by youth plastic activist Aisnina to 219 respondents all over Indonesia revealed that 86% agree that all 3 parties, namely government of exporting countries, government Indonesia, and importers, should be held accountable to clean up waste dump and rehabilitate environmental pollution impacts. 54% respondents suggest that punishment for plastic waste smuggling is revocation of import permits. 59% of Indonesians suggest that we can stop plastic waste smuggling by strengthening custom inspections and strict punishment for waste smugglers. Message from Indonesia to government of exporting countries are: treat your own waste, don't burden other countries, and don't send your trash to Indonesia. This is our recommendation for the Basel Amendment should not only control plastic waste, but should include waste paper scrap. And Basel Convention need to develop global monitoring system on plastic waste trade. Government of exporting countries should take responsibility to do cleanup and rehabilitation of exported plastic waste dumps. And plastic exporting countries should build model of environmental sound paper and plastic recycling in their own country, where more plastic waste are available. And all countries should ban single-use plastic. All countries should promote non-thermal technology for non-recyclable plastic waste treatment. And the last is enforcement of EPR regulation for FMCG multinational companies. This is my final slide. Thank you for listening.
So thank you very much. Daru, we will run a little bit over. I see that it's 2 o'clock now. If you do have questions but you have to leave, if you ask them in the Q&A section, we will make the answers available on our website. So our final speaker, Heng Chan, is a Greenpeace Malaysia campaigner. He's been extensively involved in imported plastic waste investigations. His presentation explores the toxic after effects for Malaysia caused by the importation of plastic waste from countries like New Zealand.
Hi everyone, my name is Heng Chan. You can call me Heng. I'm a Greenpeace Malaysia campaigner, currently based at Kuala Lumpur. Today I'm going to share with you about the story of plastic, focused on the imported plastic waste. For your information, China in 2018, China made announcements to ban all these imported plastic waste, especially the plastic waste that cannot be recycled into China. When China announced import bans, all the exporting countries are looking for the alternative area. That is why Southeast Asia country, especially Malaysia, also turned into the next dumping ground from all this plastic waste that cannot be recycled. So in my presentations later, I'm going to share with you some of the our findings and what can we do in the future. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share with you the slide. Okay. So I'm going to share with you the toxic after effect of imported plastic waste in Malaysia. Okay, for your information, in 2018, Greenpeace Malaysia started the plastic waste investigations to expose these broken global systems. In 2018, we published a report called The Recycling Myth to expose the broken global recycling systems. And then in this year, in 2020, we also launched another report called Recycling Myth 2.0. It's mentioning the toxic after effects of imported plastic waste in Malaysia. Okay, for example, all these are the plastic waste that we found in Malaysia, and all these are the plastic waste that cannot be recycled, and mostly are from the high-income country or developed country. As you can see, we can find the plastic waste from Switzerland, the plastic waste, the Starbucks plastic from USA, and also plastic waste from Australia and New Zealand. And another example is this one. This is the McDonald's plastic waste from McDonald's from Europe that was printed in 4 languages. And if, this is a plastic waste that we got it from other countries. It was printed in Italian, French, German, and English. And we found it in a rural area in Malaysia called Jenjarum. And after we launched the reports in 2018, we also submit this reports, the Recycling Myth report, to the Minister of Conservation, also the Associate Minister of Environment, Eugenics, together with the local committee. We organized groups of the local committee together with Greenpeace New Zealand. We hand over our memorandums and also the reports to the minister, and we hope she can make a positive change. And after that, in May 24, 2019, the minister also made an announcement that to say that Malaysia is acting on the illegal smuggling of plastic waste, and she also supporting the country that, like the exporting country, to send it back. So if you are referring to the news by the staff.com in May 2019, this is the news in New Zealand. And we were there, and then we are witnessing that we need more the commitments done by the minister. And after that, this is, as what I said, this is not just a Malaysian problem, it's the global problems that we need to work together. After that, when so many international media came to Southeast Asia to highlight this broken global system, like lots of countries also start, especially the government also like take some positive actions to crack down the illegal plastic waste facility, and also send back some of the plastic waste that cannot be recycled. But this doesn't stop immediately, because when governments taking actions to send it back, ship it back the plastic waste that cannot be recycled, at the same time, we also found a lot of the local community in other area, for example, in northern part of Malaysia called Sungai Petani, Kedah, and local community were complaining the increased risk of air pollution and also water pollution caused by all this illegal plastic waste facility. And after that, after we launched the first report, we also continued another report. The second report, we actually targeted and focused more on the toxic contaminations caused by all these imported plastic waste. So we went to a few places such as in Sungai Petani, we went to Selangor, we went to a few places in Malaysia that were highly contaminated by all these imported plastic waste. And then we collect the water sampling, soil sampling, and we launched the reports, and all the findings are in the Greenpeace reports. And for example, we went to all these places called Pulau Indah, and we found a lot of plastic waste from New Zealand and Australia. And some of the plastic waste that cannot be recycled, they were just dump it and burn. They were burned deliberately. And this is another place called Sri Chiding, Kuala Langat, and also a rural areas about 1 hour far away from the capital, Malaysia capital, Kuala Lumpur. And then when we were there, we also received a complaint from local community that the irresponsible businessman just dumped the plastic waste in the rural area, and then they would just burn it. And it's also caused the air pollution to the nearby residents. This is the latest one. In Sungai Petani, which is about 3 hours far away from Kuala Lumpur, the capital Kuala Lumpur, northern part of Malaysia. This town, a small town, Sungai Petani, recently also found a lot of the plastic waste that cannot be recycled. And this is the latest news that we got. Okay, I moved a little bit. Okay, this is important because it happened last week in 13 June 2020, and we found the plastic waste were just dumped and also burned at this place, Sungai Petani. And most importantly, we also found the plastic waste from New Zealand and Australia. For example, you can see, can you recognize this logo? Okay, and all these plastic waste, are mostly from the household brands, the fast-moving consumer goods company, and all these the packaging, the company are not from Malaysia, and so we can say that we can conclude that all these plastic waste are imported plastic waste, and there are so much of similar same plastic waste were imported from other country and not available. All this plastic is not available in Malaysia. So we can see that this is a plastic waste from other country. Like this is a plastic waste from New Zealand. Okay, and also can you see the logo? And we also found some of the plastic waste are from from Australia and New Zealand. Okay. Okay, so what we want to highlight that is this is not just a Malaysia problem, it's a global problem. So our recommendations to the global community is that we need to work together to have a global agreement to combat the floods of plastic, the unnecessary single-use plastic. That is why the governments from all around the world, especially the plastic waste exporting country, should set clear reductions on all this single-use plastic. The second demand is to prioritize a plastic pollution reduction plan to reduce all this unnecessary single-use plastic. The last but not least is also the enforce the extended producer responsibility, what we call as an EPR, in the productions of plastic by regulating the corporations, especially global fast-moving consumer goods that produce single-use plastic packaging for its product. We also have to ask them to strengthen them in the transparency of the plastic usage, the disposal, and also recycling system internationally. So I just want to make quick conclusions. Again, this is a global broken system because globally only 9% of plastic waste has been recycled, 12% has been incinerated, and the rest of 79% end up in natural environment. That is why we can always see the sea creatures like whale, dolphins, turtle die because of all these plastic waste pollutions. Recycling is good, but recycling alone cannot fix our plastic pollution fast enough. So to solve this problem, we also have to promote the sustainable and ethical circular economy framework, targeted and also prioritize the reductions first. This is the problem of overconsumption of unnecessary single-use plastic. So the solutions of overconsumption should be reductions. The reductions of unnecessary single-use plastic. Then we also have to ask the corporations to invest in the system, to redesign the system based on reuse and refuse. Before we talk about recycling, we should also focus on the reductions of unnecessary single-use plastic, and also redesign the current system based on refuse and reuse. Refuse and reuse, then we can reduce all this overconsumptions problem, then we will go to recycling. So against this is a global problem. All countries should be work together to reduce unnecessary single-use plastic in phases. A lot of people always say that if we want to focus on protect environmental protections, we will stop developments. Some people, especially the businessman, the developer, will say that, okay, you want to protect environments, but so you actually are against development. But I want to highlight that in the words economy, there's also another terms called eco. There's a terms eco in the words economy, which means that we need to include sustainable developments, protect our environments in developing doing the development. So towards a sustainable economy, the future is our hands. Thank you.
So thank you very much to all of our presenters. We now have a little bit of time for some Q&A with the presenters. There's a Q&A function down the bottom of the screen that you can ask questions in. And while we do that, we have a question to put to the panelists ourselves. So the two really important questions that we'd like to ask speak to what Tricia outlined at the beginning of the webinar. New Zealanders were given the opportunity to respond to the call for submissions on the national response to the Basel Convention's plastic amendments. As Tricia talked about, these amendments would involve revising the imports and exports order to include mixed plastic waste in New Zealand's permitting system. Submitters were asked to respond to one of two possible options. Option one was for permits going for mixed plastic waste without specifications for separated plastic waste. Option two was permits for mixed plastic waste with specifications for separated plastic wastes, such as a specific maximum rate for contamination. The New Zealand government has been very clear in their call for submissions that they preferred option one. So this means that the government would be happy for there to be permits for mixed plastic waste, but they don't want permits for separated plastic waste, nor for mixed PP, PE and PET. In addition, the New Zealand government doesn't want specifications nor contamination limits for separated plastic waste, mixed PPE, PE and PET, nor do they want specification nor contamination limits for mixed plastic waste. So to each of the presenters, I want to ask them what is their response to the government's preference for option one. Perhaps, Hen, this is something that you might like to speak to first. I will just start your video and unmute you so that we can see you.
Okay, hi Aaron. Thanks for the questions. So I would say that the New Zealand governments need to be more ambitious, because the option one is still not enough to highlight these problems. Again, nobody is perfect, and I believe that everyone is contributing to this problem, and it's time for us to reduce all this problem. So how to do it is nobody should be used, nobody or no country should be used as a dumping ground, and all the countries have to deal with their own waste problem, especially the plastic waste. So in these options, in this situation, I will go for options two, because the governments need to be more ambitious and do more in their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Daru, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, for me, in Ekoton, we refuse to have a mixed plastic waste export from a developed country, because as we can see what already happened here, the mixed waste is really difficult to be recycled, and the impact is so bad for our environment. So for me, I prefer that New Zealand government will stop exporting mixed waste, plastic waste or paper scrap waste.
And so what do you think the contamination limits for New Zealand plastic exports should be, and why?
Yeah, I think we have to follow what the global agreement already developed. So we start with 2%, like Indonesia already also start with 2%, and gradually we will push government to stay in line with China to set at 1.0%.
Ken, would you like to add to that?
No, 0.5%. Yeah, sorry, sorry.
Yeah, I think Daryl already answered it because our position is the same. So we also have to set a clear timeline to reduce all these unnecessary single-use plastic and also reduce the contaminations limits.
So if anyone has a question that they would like to ask of the presenters, you can do that now into the Q&A box.
And if nobody has anything else to offer just now, does Hing and Daru, have you got anything else that you'd like to contribute to the conversation now that we've heard from all the panelists today? And thank you again so much for joining us. Hing, would you like to offer anything else at this point?
Okay, maybe I can just elaborate more because I started this Greenpeace started this campaign in 2018, and we also found a lot of like all this. We call this as a recycling myth, because it doesn't mean that recycling is bad. Recycling is still good, but I want to highlight that recycling alone cannot fix the pollution fast enough. So to tackle this problem, we still have to focus on the reductions, because like when the plastic waste have a recycle logo, doesn't mean that it will be recycled or it will be recycled properly. So we also have to like ask like the governments to monitor, to have a better system mechanism to monitor and make sure all this plastic that can be recycled and that can be recycled properly. Because what happened in Southeast Asian country, because the law enforcement is not, the environmental regulations, the law enforcement is not that strong, and even Malaysian government admitted that corruption and smuggling might happen. That is why we have to say like this is just a global scandal. So we are not just blaming one or two countries, but all the country and governments have to set the ambitious target to reduce the single-use plastic. At the same time, the most important thing also have to target on the global fast-moving consumer goods, because they are the biggest producer for all this unnecessary single-use plastic. So we have to tackle governments and also the corporation, then we can reduce the problems.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hing.
Maybe I can also add that the plastic production is not is too big to be handled, and recycle don't have capacity to recycle all the materials. Right now, only 9% of global plastic production that enter to recycling. So the problem is from the production side, and we have to encourage the extended producer responsibility to be implemented by especially the multinational FMCGs like Unilever, Coca-Cola, and other big brands, that they have to stop using small pouch of a sachet that usually they use it in developing country, and they said it's pro-poor, but actually it's really big problem here. It's difficult to collect all the small packaging, and it's not recyclable because it's multi-layers. It's made from different polymers, so it's very difficult to be recycled. We need to push the multinational FMCGs to to stop using double standard. They don't use sachet in their developed country, but why they sell it in developing country, and it's become a very big problem here. We can see in the rivers, on the beach, single-use plastic packaging, especially sachet, is the most dominated waste. So. And also for the developed country, if recycling is possible, you put a logo of recyclable. So please, you have to be the good example how to recycle that in your own country, because in my country the recycling is not done in environmentally sound management. It's only done by the home industry. It's very small scale, and they use groundwater to wash the plastic, and then they just discharge the wastewater without any treatment to our rivers. So it's really not good to be done in developing countries. So we hope that as developed countries have more capacity, better technology, better financial. So I think the developed countries should build their own recycling system in your own country, because we don't have capacity to treat other countries' waste. We have our own problem with our domestic waste. So please don't add more to our government or to our community.
Thanks, Daru. What other questions? Maybe we just have two more questions. I can see we're way over time. But I really wanted to ask you this question. Often when I raise the matter of the Basel plastic amendments, quite often just the general public they say to me, well, why are developing countries taking or accepting our waste? And so I wondered if you could please speak to prior informed consent and some of the issues associated with that, and why we need to go further than simply prior informed consent.
Okay, maybe I can answer this first. Okay, prior informed consent is like for the governments, for the accepting country to get consent to accept all these waste that claim that they can be recycled. But at the same time, developing country also have other issues, especially the enforcement. Like for example, in Malaysia here, Malaysian governments themselves also admitted that the smuggling might happen, the corruptions might happen, and they also admitted that they have capacity to deal with all this huge amount of plastic waste. I mean, we are also in touch with the Malaysia Plastic Recycle. They claim that they are victims because there are so many irresponsible people who just take advantage on all this recycle. So some people are doing good job, recycle are doing good job, but at the same time, there are people who took advantage. So and also cause the contamination, the soil contamination, water pollution, air pollution. So it also damaging the reputations and also the good work of the recycle here. So the best way is we have to have like prior informed consent, and we need more ambitious timeline, more ambitious target to reduce all these the plastic waste problems.
Why Indonesia import plastic waste and paper scrap? Because we have industry here that depends on the raw material in our own supply in Indonesia cannot meet all their needs. So that's why they import. Like in paper scrap, we need 50% of the supply from the imported paper scrap. But unfortunately, there is smuggling happening, and because of corruption, and also lack of monitoring from the government. Although we have the regulation, previously we have 5% limits, but in fact, the contamination is far more than 5%, like we found in the field. The paper company said sometimes they get like 30% impurities. Not 5%, but 30%. Can you imagine how big the plastic and other contaminants come with the paper bales? So because of increase of the paper scrap dumping in 2018 related with the China ban. So we tried to raise this issue, and finally government heard that, and now we have stricter limit to at 2%. So we have industry. Actually, we can cooperate, but we need clarity on the limit, and we need strong monitoring on that, who doing that. It should not only the importing country, but exporting country also should have a good monitoring system that only 2% right now can be allowed to be imported to other countries.
Oh, thanks, Daru. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for taking some of the cost and the responsibility away from receiving countries, both in terms of checks at customs, which is extremely expensive and difficult to do to determine contamination rates on receipt. But also, I think the important thing is you know, in terms of, you know, just not allowing this stuff to go in the first place, but also sending waste back. And as I mentioned in the opening presentation, we've, you know, Indonesia, your country, Daru, has sent back 5 containers at the cost of Indonesia, and that's just not right. So there's a number of parts of the system that's very broken, and New Zealand has to play its part. And I hope that through the submission process, the government is reviewing that with all of these wonderful submissions. Hopefully they're coming through, that will protect receiving countries from the waste from developed countries. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to furthering this conversation either online or other sort of future meetings. So thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Lisa now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both again. And thank you for making the presentations and coming along in person. And thank you too to Yuyun and Serene for their presentations. So we're going to close out now. The presentation, the recording will be available at perc.ac.nz. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa. So thanks everybody for coming, and thank you to our presenters. Ka kite anō.
Ka kite.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.